a cavalcade of writers who dazzle with their wit, a mighty throng of seamen, awash with God and grit, the poets and the artists who venerate these shores, the tourists in their flip-flops, track sand into the stores, disciples of St. Peter, who worship by the sea, the wise Sicilian nonnas, reciting rosary, descendants of the English, the Finns and Portuguese, who greet each other daily and coexist in peace, the wealthy in their mansions, along a scenic drive, the minimum wage workers who struggle to survive, and don't forget the first ones, to walk these storied hills. Their whispers linger in the wind, their drum beats echo still.
Well, welcome again to another episode of Gloucester Bookies, and I am joined today by a special guest, Captain George Grimes, who tells me that he is often introduced as Gull Grimes.
Gull Grimes.
But we'll call you Captain, as you have earned it. I don't know whether you earned the Gull or not, did you?
Well, I don't
Goes back
know.
too far to know.
Some people say it's because maybe I eat a lot. I don't know, but
Seagulls do. Anyway, your book that I'd like people to understand is available still. What is it, through Amazon? How can you
it's
get it?
available at the Dogtown Bookstore in Gloucester.
All right.
And the bookstore on Main Street.
In Gloucester, right.
In Gloucester, and also the Maritime Heritage.
And this is Maritime Heritage in Gloucester. Okay.
In Gloucester.
This is called Water Under the Keel. Wonderful title. I admire you. Did you think of that, or somebody else gave you?
Actually, I was trying to come up with a title, and the only thing I could think of was "It's All Water Over the Dam."
Yes.
So I just modified it a little bit.
And you did. It was splendid. Water Under the Keel, Memoirs of a Seagoing Life, and of course it's by Captain George Grimes. This is illustrated as well as a text, and anybody who's interested in the maritime, especially maritime of the 20th century, when there was a change from different cargo types ships to the container ships that we have today, which was all part of the cutting edge when you were going through this. I'd like to start, though, with Rockport, because a lot of our fans and people that listen are from Rockport, as you yourself are. And in my own reminiscence, I lived in Gloucester, but we would go to the 4th of July parade in Rockport. And when I was young, there was, we were near the Peg Leg restaurant. We typically stand there. And as the parade went by, I'd sometimes hear up in the distance great cheers. Wonder what hero or astronaut or who's coming through. And the cheers kept going, closer and closer. Something's coming closer. It was a Sea Scout. Popular group.
Very much.
And all the way, both sides, and people applauding and yelling for the Sea Scouts. And I know you were a member of the Sea Scouts, so I'd like you to, because I think when you think back, how come I went on the sea for a career? Something might say, part of it, my experience in the Sea Scouts. And tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I had this idea. Of course, I was a Cub Scout when I was really young, and I had this idea that I was going to be a Boy Scout at one point. And I went up to the Boy Scout hall, and they didn't seem very friendly. The kids were kind of bullying me a little bit, and they didn't seem very friendly. And I said, well, that's all right. no problem, I'll wait a year and join the Sea Scout. And so when I became 14, I couldn't wait. I went down to the Sandy Bay Yacht Club, and that's where we met on a Friday nights. And I joined and worked my way up through the ranks. They had a similar ranking structure like Eagle Boy Scouting. And I worked my way up to quartermaster. And we had a lot of benefits for the Sea Scouts. We took a yearly cruise, and what happened was that there were 4 or 5 local boat owners in Rockport that volunteered the use of their boats 1 weekend a year. And they had to go, the owners would go along, but we would do all the sailing. And so we'd go down to Maine for 3 or 4 day trips. And another benefit that I received was there was the skipper of the Sea Scouts, the leader, had some connections with the company that imported a lot of the frozen fish. Years ago, they had
Sure.
the freighters coming
Very
in.
familiar.
Right, and so he must have exercised his influence or asked for a favor or whatever, but he got myself and a friend of mine on a 2-week trip to Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
Yes. And
And-
we went up to St. John's and Bay Bulls and Witless Bay. And when we got down to St. John's, I came out of Gloucester on a ship called the Blue Trader. And it was the Blue Peter steamship line. And I came out of Gloucester and I got to Newfoundland and they said, well, we got to change in orders. Going to send the Blue Trader down the Great Lakes. And I was all excited. I thought I was going to go to the Great Lakes, but they said, no, you can stay with Tom
Somebody-
O'Donnell, who was the fellow who arranged the trip. So anyway, I won't go into details, but I did meet my first girlfriend there. She happened to be Tom's house babysitter. And anyway,
Well, it's in the book, folks.
It's in the
and
book.
It's fascinating because there was a tie-up later. How many years later? 30 years later or something? Where
Oh
you-
yes, yeah. That Marie. I'm trying to think back.
Well, without names anyway. But you went on, you came in with a ship into Newfoundland. I believe it was Newfoundland.
Yes.
And then you said something that jibed a memory or there.
Oh, my memory is now jarred. Many years later, I was a marine surveyor, and I found myself assigned to survey a tanker up in Newfoundland, and I had to go to St. John's and fly down there and rent a car, and which I did. And on the way to the terminal, I knew I was going through Bay Bulls, and I knew that Marie used to live there,
Yes.
my friend, and her sister still lived there, and I knew that. So I went to her sister's house, and she had only met me one time in Rockport, but she recognized me. So I found out that Marie had,
Yeah.
gotten
Gotten
married
married.
and had children.
That's it.
And all that. So, but anyway, I wanted to get back to the Sea Scouts because it was instrumental, and it influenced me in deciding to go to sea a great deal. We had regattas every spring. At that time, we had Sea Scout groups in Ipswich, Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, Rockport, and we would all get together once a year in the spring, and we would have all these contests. We'd have rowing contests, sailing contests, dot tying, semaphore, blinker light, all kinds of things. So that was really fun.
Let me
And-
just mention, it's an interesting thing to glean from the book, because when you started the book, the very first page is a long series of acknowledgement. And these names are mostly people who, as you say here, I'm quoting, gave countless hours providing guidance and instructions, sharing their knowledge and experience. And what I thought of was that nobody goes to sea alone. You're standing on the shoulders of a long line of people.
Mhm.
And what you mentioned with the Sea Scouts is you incorporated that early on. You incorporated that influence,
right.
those people who knew something, and very happy to share it with you. Yeah.
That's
All right.
right. One of the gentlemen was an ex-retired naval officer, and he told us one night, anyone that wants to learn celestial navigation, come down to my house one night a week. And two of us did that.
Sure.
And I learned it. And when I later,
Well, you're funny. I'm going to tell you, this book is an incredible source of anecdotes, and some of them are funny, comical. You underrate your ability to learn. I think it was a sextant.
the sextant,
You
yes.
tell us about that. It's
Of
in the
course.
book, but yes.
Well, the final requirement for quartermaster was to build your own sextant. And I thought at first, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Well, I got the Sea Scout manual, and in the back of the manual, there was a copy of a drawing that showed up, and I researched it just the other day. It showed up in a popular science magazine, 1933, because a little note said this was taken from an article.
From it,
So I
yeah.
researched it, and I got a copy of the magazine. And so one of my goals in the next few months is I'm going to repeat the sextant that I made. I don't have the original one.
Well, in this instance, sextant, people may not all realize, the sextant is an item used often at sea for navigation to find out where you are. Is that it?
Well, basically, a sextant is used to measure the angle of the sun above the horizon. And that sounds simple, but there are corrections involved to make it happen. And what you have is a thing with a handle on it. It's got an arm that slides on an arc, a measured arc, measured in degrees. The arm has a mirror. Well, first of all, you're looking through a tube, an eyeglass, and then the arm has a mirror which takes the reflection of the sun, bounces it down onto another mirror on the frame of the sextant, and then back. And the frame on the sextant is divided in half. So you can see the horizon and you can see the image of the sun. In between, you have a device which drops down shades because the sun is obviously very bright. So, long story short, you can take that measurement, but the important thing to do, not only do you need the measurement, but you have to have a stopwatch right handy, because time is very essential in the navigation problem. So you click the stopwatch, and then you go into the chart room and you look at the chronometer, which is a delicately balanced timepiece, which gives the time at Greenwich Meridian in Greenwich, England. And you need that to determine longitude.
I have heard this, but I read that you underrated your ability to learn this, and
My wife told me.
didn't overstate the complexity that you just described. You underrated yourself, but you did learn it. In fact, you had a sextant on the what was it, Now and Then, or Now and When, or When
and If.
When and If, the ship, the When and If, which some people may recall listening. But the When and If, and you were the captain and had a sextant.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you and your wife discussed financially, you'd like to get ahead a little by selling your sextant. Your wife said, "No, don't sell it." You sold it anyway.
I did,
But
and I regretted
you
it.
regretted it. Now, how many years later, fast forward, you were in a barbershop or something?
Yeah, approximately 25 to 30 years later, I found myself in front of Sal's Barbershop on Main Street and waiting to get a haircut, speaking to a fellow next to me. And
Total stranger.
Total
stranger.
stranger next to me. And we got talking about navigation and going to sea, and I said I had a sextant and I regretted selling it. The fellow said, "Well, I bought a sextant from a fellow that was captain of a big schooner called the When and If." And I looked at the guy in shock. I said, "You have my sextant."
Because this was the guy. You were the When and If skipper that this
That's
man
right.
bought.
That's right.
Never. And I think he sold it back to you, or what happened?
I bought it back. I
Yeah.
offered him, I
Sure.
forget what the price
Sure.
was.
Yeah.
The only downside to that story is that he had taken the sextant, apparently, on the Newport to Bermuda race, and he must have handled it pretty roughly because it has a slight error. When you bring they call it the sun's lower limb. So when you
Okay.
bring the lower edge of the sun down,
Yeah.
you should have a very clear, defined edge.
Oh, that sexton paid you back for letting it go. After.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to do some little trick before we turn over. You got some illustrations to help us with and show us about your life on the sea. But I'm going to do this. This is going to see if you're still at the top of your game.
Okay.
Okay? Now, I understand when you when you were at the Maine Maritime
Maine
Academy,
Maritime Academy.
an upperclassman could at any time say to you the question, and I'm going to do that question, and what
Okay.
you'd have to respond. I'm going to do the question. Mr. Grimes, how long have you been sailing?
All me bloomin' life, sir. Me mother was a mermaid. I was, my mother was,
My
all me
father
bloomin'
was
life, sir. My
King Neptune.
King Neptune. All me bloomin' life, sir. Me father was King Neptune. Me mother was a mermaid. I was born on the crest of a wave and rocked in the cradle of the deep. My eyes are stars, my teeth are spars. My hair is hempen seaweed. When I spit stars. I's tough. I am, I are. Sir. And of course, when you're saying that, you're standing at a brace and you're trying to suck your stomach in and you're
doing
at
that
attention.
attention.
And,
But
you know.
I do believe, if I understand right, under your book rules, and the maritime rules, you would be punished because you didn't say the Neptune before you did the mother and the mermaid. So
Yeah, if
what
you
was the
didn't-
punishment? You had to stand.
Well, they gave you demerits and you
Yeah.
gave up a Liberty weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to do it all over again.
I can't believe I messed that up. The reason I messed that up is because I tried to do it slow. You know, if I
And
did
they-
it, all me blowing lights, sir, my father was King Neptune. Yeah.
That was part of it? You're supposed to do that fast? Ideally?
Yeah. Yeah. My father was King Neptune, my mother was never, yeah, and I won't go through it all again, but yeah.
I love it. All right. Now we're going to let you take over because right now you're the captain and I'm the crew. You've got a bunch of slides to show us. Many of these are illustrations in your book, and you can go through it. Just narrate a bit, will you
Okay,
please?
this is a presentation that I have made up, and I use it occasionally at different organizations, and I'll just go through some of them pretty quickly. This is a brief rundown of my great-great-grandfather. He sailed out of Salem, captain of a square rig ship. He was on several ships. Then his son was in the Civil War.
I'm going to interrupt only for a reason because it is in your book, and it's fascinating to me. On page 17, you have quoted from a letter of this great-grandfather, this Captain Stickney, who writes, it's just wonderful. It says, November 1st, 1830, at sea, dear Martha, it is with pleasure to inform you that I am now safe around Cape Horn in the latitude of 28 degrees south, longitude 84 degrees west, in the southeast trades. And I must say, I think he's being comical here because I doubt that his wife will understand anything. Somehow he's in the South Seas, south of the sea, running with a gentle breeze toward the north and westward. And then he says, and to me this is a killer,
Yeah,
I suppose you would like to know something about my passage after leaving Boston
exactly.
and the pilot. And then there's more. But I just wanted to at least quote from that letter that you have in the book as an example of the kind of jokes that a captain or a crew might indulge.
Well, the humor here is, the way I see it, this fellow's been at sea for 2 months trying to beat around Horn and get to Valparaiso or wherever he's going. And he writes a one-page letter, and now he's been away for 2 months, and his wife doesn't know whether he's alive or dead.
Right.
And he says, I suppose you might like to know something about my passage.
Just like that. That's right. And
Yeah.
so that brings alive this what otherwise would be just a name on the board.
Right.
But keep going because I know you have some pictures. There is some pictures.
Now, on my mother's side of the family, My grandfather was...
This is Rockport, right?
This is Rockport. This is the Strathmouth Life Saving Station in Rockport.
About what, 1900?
This would have been probably 1915.
1915,
He
okay.
became a surfman in notice the sign, U.S. Life Saving Station, so that would indicate it's before 1917,
Okay,
because it gets switched over to the Coast Guard.
Good.
Right about then. Now this is a picture of a device called the Breeches Buoy, and there, when I give presentations, I find very surprised that very few people have heard of the Breeches Buoy. And you'll see real quickly the cannon on the left side of the picture, and then there's a big cart with ropes on it, and the reels, double reels. Well, this was a device used to get people off of stranded ships. That's all they had. They had a choice. They could either take a lifeboat and try to row out and save the people, or if it was too rough, they would have to use this.
now what's the cannon, what's the cannon?
Okay, the cannon is used to fire a projectile, and the projectile is attached to a small line called a whip, shot line. And that's attached to a larger line. Hopefully, if they aim it right, the personnel on the ship will grab it and they'll pull it out. And when they pull the end of the small line, they'll see a piece of plywood or whatever with instructions written in English and French. And they tell them what to do next. They would pull the heavier line until they got a line which was an endless line through a block, and they'd make that fast really high. Then they'd signal to shore, and then the people ashore would know enough to pull the breeches buoy out, which was a life ring with a pair of canvas breeches, like pants, that you have to trust. Now, you're in the middle of the night in the teeth of a gale, nobody can see anything, it's blowing, freezing cold, and somebody tells you got to jump in this thing and hang on for dear life, while these people you don't know ashore are going to drag you through the surf. Well, hundreds and hundreds of lives were saved with that device.
So it was not just something in a museum, it was used.
That's right.
Used in actual storms.
It really saved lives.
Yeah.
This I'll go through quickly. This is my grandfather with his buddies, and you'll see the women in the background. They always used to come down to flirt while they watched the breeches buoy drill. One thing about these life-saving stations is they drilled constantly, day after day.
Go back, because I think you got a story to say. These people weren't merely flirting. Sometimes they courted and married. What's the story behind you in your family?
Well, they had girlfriends, and they used to come down. And in fact, it's kind of ironic, because when I was a Sea Scout, I went down to the same lifeboat station, and I played pool with some of the Coast Guard guys down there. Right. So there's some similarity there.
Good.
This is just an old picture of Rockport, which I put in the presentation.
Those in the know will recognize.
Well,
motif number
those
one.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. Those in the know will recognize a vessel way over to the right.
Yes.
You see the double-ended Coast Guard vessel.
That's the Coast Guard vessel. Okay.
That's a 36-foot motor lifeboat.
All right.
And those are the ones that were designed to roll over completely and come back up again. And if you were strapped in, and if you held your breath long enough, you'd be okay.
All right.
But incidentally, I might add that one of the Coast Guard fellows, when I was 15 years old, let me drive that vessel, or one like it.
Okay.
And it was the first. This is George as a youngster in Rockport.
That's himself.
Yeah.
All right.
Contemplating something, I'm not sure exactly what.
Yeah.
Okay, and I was a member of the yacht club in Sandy Bay.
Yeah.
And we had every 4th of July, we had events for the young kids. And I'm in the rowboat that's right in the center, headed directly away. And I always wore this captain's hat. For what reason, I don't know, but I had a thing for it. And my kids, my friends used to always pick on me about it.
All right.
But,
you eventually wore one with actuality.
I did.
There you are.
That's an old fellow with, he used to take care of the club, and My very first boat, well, actually, my very second boat. My very first boat was a small rowboat. But this was a turnabout, and you'll see the second boat from the right, number 416, is me. And in those days, those of you who are watching this that are sailors will get a kick out of this. In those days, they used to give us a downwind start for the race. So we never had time to properly separate. So we always ended up at the lower mark in one clump. And it was always rather chaotic. And you can see that's a chaotic rounding coming up right there. But, and then this is just give an idea that I'm in the blue boat in the middle, and that's my boat called Whirlwind. And again, you see the double-ended Coast Guard boat on the upper top left, and that was there for years. And they used to tow us to neighboring yacht clubs, and we would race and come home. These one of the rowing vessels. I think it's interesting to note here, for those of you from Cape Ann, Gloucester had an unbeatable rowing team. We could not beat Gloucester. Only we had one day on a Saturday on one regatta, we did beat Gloucester. But we had a boat called a Race Point, which was lighter than their boat. Their boat was a very heavy monomoy surf boat. So they claimed that the reason we beat them was because we had the lighter boat. And anyway, we switched boats, and we still beat them.
I like that.
So that was pretty good.
Terrific story.
This, I mentioned the Sea Scouts that my very first ship was the Blue Trader. Well, this was the vessel that came into Gloucester on a regular basis, picking up general cargo to bring north, and they would pick up frozen fish and bring it south to discharge. I went back just a few months ago, and I found this picture, believe it or not, online. I was surprised to find it. And that's one of the events in Sea Scouts that we had the tug of war, and we even went as far as to one very cold northwest wind, one cold winter day, and the wind was northwest, and we rode Santa Claus into Front Beach. And I'll never forget that day.
Aye.
This is interesting. It's a type of class that I owned for a while. When I was a teenager, Rockport had all 6 left in the world. And they were a class of boat that were built originally for well-to-do people in Manchester. And they somehow ended up owning Rockport for whatever reason, I don't know. But I owned one and raced it. And a lot of fun. And, a lot of times after the race, people would rush to get home. They'd put the boat away and they'd go home to get dinner or whatever, but not the I-boat fleet. We had cocktail parties.
Mm-hmm.
And now we get into Maine Maritime Academy. Of course, we talked a little bit earlier about that. This was my first training ship. It was a USS Comfort. It was an actual hospital ship during World War II, and was actually attacked by kamikaze on several occasions.
Well, as frequently the case, something in your book is about this ship. You said in your book that the war included some duties this ship performed, which was taking back soldiers who'd been killed in the war. And you knew this, all the people knew this. And one night you were just leaving the ship and putting your key in the lock or something.
I can tell you Wayne has really read the book. Yeah, we used to have a D-Tex watch key rounds. And when we were freshmen, we had to go various places throughout the ship. And there would be a round clock with a keyhole. And you had to turn it to prove that you had
made the rounds.
And so on the hospital ship, way down deep in the bowels of the ship, was a very dark place. And we always feared that place. That was the morgue. And that was when it was in battle, they had to do something with the dead bodies. And so they kept them down there in the morgue. But what I didn't realize was that was a common trick that the upperclassmen played on us, the freshmen.
So here you are, night in the dark, a dim part of it, and you put the key in the lock, and what happened?
I put the key in the lock, and I heard this eerie moaning sound, and chill went right down through me from top to bottom, and I thought,
And you
I don't
immediately
believe in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts, but damn it, something made that noise. And I ran up the ladder, and by the time I got to the quarter deck where the upperclassman in charge asked me, did you hear any strange sounds? And I said, yeah, I heard a moaning sound. And he got a big kick out of that, you know. So anyway, that was a common trick.
Right.
What's
this one?
This is very important, in my opinion, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it if you don't mind. This is my very first ship. I found myself down in New York and assigned to this vessel, and we loaded for about 4 days, and then I found myself taking departure at Ambrose and headed around the world, 4.5 months trip.
Yeah.
21 years old.
Yeah.
And the captain stood on the bridge at Ambrose and said goodbye to the pilot and wished him well and looked at me and said, you got it, Mr. Grimes. And he went below. And I couldn't believe it. His ship's coming at me from all directions. And I'm like, I'm in charge of this thing. This is incredible. But the significant thing about this ship, I think, is it's the last of the break bulk freighters. By break bulk, I mean the cargo had to be loaded by hand. You had to have stevedores. Much of the cargo came on board in bags. Might have been in automobiles in bulk, or big household vans, or cartons, cardboard cartons, whatever. And it all had to be stowed by hand. And go ahead.
The ship has these cranes on it, which is
That's right.
Different looking to me than the ships today.
That's right. Thank you for getting me on track. Yes, the reason I want to talk about it is that these are called cargo booms, and they use them to form what they call the yard and stay method. By that I mean the ship is alongside the dock. One of the booms was spotted right over the square of the hatch, the opening in the ship. The other boom was spotted over the apron on the dock, and the wire coming down from the top of both of them were joined together at the hook. So a really good longshoreman running the winches, he'd have one in each hand. So he was able to lift the load up, directly up on the apron of the dock. Then when it got the right height to the rail, he could just slack on one, tighten on the other, swing that load down and right down in. Now the significance is that you rarely see these now, all nothing but container ship.
It's like the blacksmiths with the horseshoes, and it's passe. Now it's container ship.
That's right.
And
That's
the
right.
cranes are on land, and they load the ship. All right.
And then later on, I'll come on a picture of the when we started loading containers. This is an interesting thing. I took a picture and I tried an experiment, and I caught it. I caught the flame coming out of the barrel of the cannon. This was every 3 months we had to have a drill in a line throwing apparatus, similar to the breeches buoy cannon.
I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, similar. Only this would be used in case of transferring.
From ship to ship.
Ship to ship.
Okay.
Exactly. Now, I took this because you can see the difference. Container ships nowadays are loaded up to the brim with piles of containers. And you don't see any of this mishmash of, everything. We loaded everything. We loaded steam locomotives. We loaded bulldozers, automobiles, whatever. And part of my job as third officer was to chase around at the lashing gangs and make sure that all this is tied down, because it has to be well secured. And we had cocktail hour once in a while on the ship. And this was back in the days when we actually had radio operators. Now it's all automated. Calcutta, and all the cargo was loaded by hand. And those fellows were singing a chant, and I wasn't able to record the chant. I wish I could. because they loaded all those heavy burlap bags.
I should interrupt just to
Yes.
tell people who are going to get this book, and there are many will, if you're going to get this book, you'll get a bonus. It's not just about, we've been talking because of the show here, it's a Cape Ann show. We've been talking about Rockport and Gloucester. But the book, just as some of these slides, is around the world.
That's
There's
right.
Vietnam, India, well, Calcutta, India, but in other parts that you've done where you have the details. So I don't be misled by the fact that there's a lot of focus on Cape Ann and Gloucester, and you never get out of Rockport. In our show, the book goes around the world.
It does indeed.
Please go on.
And one of the reasons I took this picture is because of the chaos. It looks like chaos on deck. But you can see so much to talk about in that picture. You'll see the heavy steel beams.
Mm-hmm.
They were going across the opening of the hatch when the hatch was closed. And then up in the upper left side, you see piles of hatch boards. And some of you some of the viewers might recognize hatch boards as coffee tables nowadays, because that's what I see a lot.
Yeah, people have made it. Yeah,
they made them into coffee tables. And then all the loose pieces of wood under the steel beams, that's called dunnage. And dunnage is what's put between the cargo that was loaded and the skin of the ship so that it caused friction.
Okay.
And this is just another one of my ships. This was a little different class. The other one was the C3. During the war, the government they had a large shipbuilding program, and they had classifications of vessels, C1, C2, and C3. And what was determined by the number of hatches on the ship. And that's a C1, I think. Or maybe, no, that's the same ship, I think. That's a C1. It's a little different, not about the same, but some difference. This is awaiting cargo discharge at the mouth of the Saigon River. We, very first time in Vietnam, we waited over a month to go up to Saigon and discharge. And one interesting thing, when I went up the Saigon River, I had a camera, and I went out on the wing of the bridge to take pictures. And the Vietnamese pilot taking us up, panicked. He said, "You get inside, they shoot you, they shoot you." And I realized that I was in the middle of a war.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very naive. But the beauty of these ships is that we used to be able to load from lighters, from barges, native vessels that come alongside, and that's what we're doing there. Now, we anchored in one port in Vietnam, and right after we anchored, we heard this terrific bang underwater. We didn't know what it was. We found out later that it was one of these Navy boats dropping concussion grenades underwater. And the reason for that was that the week before, this shocked me, a week before, a ship in the very same anchorage had been blown up by explosives, and it was planted underwater. So they dropped these grenades to try to prevent that from happening. And of course, being naive, I'd go like a tourist and walk down the main street of Saigon in the middle of a war, and then, you don't know who those little kids are. They could have been Viet Cong, but we didn't think about it. Now you see here is a newer ship. It's the beginning of the containerization. They still have the booms, but we had hydraulic hatch covers, which made it very different. And they used to be able to stow the containers on deck. We tried to get them in the hold down below, but no. We're going to go back to Cape Ann again now.
Yay! Okay.
Those of you who are familiar with Cape Ann, have been to Gloucester, around the port much, or have boats, probably all know the Captain Dave. It still belongs to Rosa's Oil Service, and it's still sailing in the harbor. I became captain of that for 1 year, and we used to fuel the vessels. And I took a job on a Boston fuel tanker, and we used to come up to Danversport. There was a little terminal there. We brought some fuel up there. This is a fellow that I worked with as a launch operator at Manchester Yacht Club. As you can see, I do skip around a lot. That's the way my career has gone. I've kind of changed jobs. But this fellow on the left, obviously we were a little younger in those days, but
Right.
he was my good friend. Then I became captain of a boat called the When and If.
That's the When and If.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a boat. She's still sailing.
Mhm.
She's down in the Caribbean now. And she was originally built for General George Patton and his private yacht.
Ah,
And it went down through successive generations. And back around 1974, my wife Sally was in charge of admissions at Landmark School in Price Crossing.
Right.
And Dr. Drake, the headmaster, saw an importance in sail training. And these children with their learning problems were average or above average intelligence, but they were just having trouble with reading. And very smart kids. And their self-esteem trying to pass through the public school systems, very often their problem wasn't recognized until later. And their self-esteem
Suffered.
was really low.
Sure.
So Dr. Drake felt the value in building self-confidence and sail training. So anyway, long story short, I was at sea. My wife, I called my wife, and she said, "You want to be captain of the When and If?" And I said, "You get it," and because I knew the boat,
Yes.
and so I was captain 4 years on her. And this is a picture that is actually, I confess, it's copied from a calendar, but it's typical of many of the days we had in Alaska. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I went from the When and If to the tankers, and then I went on to big super tankers in Alaska. And this is one of the vessels I was on. This is also a picture I copied from a calendar, but it gives you a good idea of the contrast in size. This is the Arco California. She's 180,000 deadweight ton.
Ooh.
1.8 million barrels of oil. We used to go to Long Beach, California, to Valdez, Alaska, and I always tell people that I had nothing to do with the Exxon Valdez.
Yes.
However, we did go by her out of ground several times.
Yeah.
The Echo Fairbanks, she's a 120,000 ton ship. And I might point out in this picture that the tanks are, you'll notice, terraced out on a mountain. When I was chief mate, which I was in charge of loading these ships. And in the beginning, when we were ready to begin loading, I would tell them to give me the minimal rate. The minimal rate of loading was 18,000 barrels an hour. And you could just hear it begin to trickle through. And, you know, people have told me, well, they must have really big pumps for that. They weren't pumps at all. It was all done by gravity.
Gravity.
All done by gravity.
Did not know.
And the maximum rate at that time was 110,000 barrels an hour for 4 16-inch loading arms. Then I went on, after 9 years on tankers, I went on to tugboat. Now, this is a big articulated tug and barge. That device on the bow down near the waterline has a slot in it, and I'll go on to show you there. If you look down on the lower part of the picture, that's the bow of the tug, and there's a rail going vertically with what looks like steps on either side. The rail fits into the slot, and then we have a device on the bridge where we hydraulically connect. So we push a big barge, and the tug can articulate separate. And that's those are pictures. We were involved in the big oil spill that was in the Gulf 8 or 10 years ago, the Discover Enterprise. And that's pretty much it.
Well, let's do this. I have some questions for you. One
Yeah.
of them is,
I went
In
through
fact,
that quicker than.
you certainly did. But the book, remember, everybody can pace themselves when they're reading the book. And I love to look back on Rockport things. In this instance, you're living, I think at that time, your house was on Main Street.
High Street.
High Street.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure.
In the beginning, High Street.
Breakfast, this is quoted from your book. Breakfast usually consisted of bacon sandwiches and delicious crusty donuts from a coffee shop located a few doors from our home. The name and ownership of this coffee shop has changed over the years, but the donuts still taste exactly the same. Today, visitors to Rockport can sample these donuts at the Brothers Brew coffee shop in the very same building. These donuts could have been the beginning of my lifelong battle with high cholesterol, but it doesn't stop me from going there often. That's a true story in both ways, right?
It's very true. It's very true. I lived on Main Street, and I went to school, grammar school. That's what's now the library on School Street.
Yeah.
And my mother used to go down to get those donuts.
One thing, it's wonderful to see passing references, older people like us, guys, who are probably watching as well, to see references to those little black and white televisions. That was television. There was no widescreen. There was no color TV. There was no cable vision. There was it was just 4, 5, and 7, right? The three stations.
Oh, yeah, you only had 3 or 4 channels.
4, 5, and 7.
Yeah.
And you watch Don Kent for the weather. But those black and white TVs, that was what you saw. And you mentioned one of the programs, and again, I remember this when it was being aired in the 1950s. Lots of people were watching it besides your family, but you did. Victory at Sea.
Yes.
Yep, that series. And you thought that might have had something to do with your getting into the feeling and flavor of being at sea.
Yeah, I think that could be. Yeah. That could be.
There's certainly a possibility, one of those things. But besides, you were next to Front Beach. What more do you want?
Grew up on Front Beach. That was my backyard. My mom used to just, I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and I'd go down the steps on the beach. She said, be careful, you know.
Be careful. That's a good one for anybody going at sea, right? Good. You were involved, you have a short chapter in the book about the blizzard of 78 and the can-do. And I think you said some things about that. I don't want to repeat the whole thing because people want to read it. There's a chapter. It's in the book. Get it?
Right.
But will you tell a little bit about the blizzard of recollections that you have on shore? Very different from the recollections people have.
Yeah, I didn't. I actually didn't experience the blizzard on the ship. I was on a chemical carrier in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Oh, you far from the blizzard.
And I called my wife, and I said, well, I understand you guys are going to get clobbered. And she said, well, it hasn't started snowing yet, but the house is shaking.
Hey, that's an example.
So they did, and we couldn't get into port for several days.
Let me
because of it.
Switch it this way. You've had so many pictures up on there about different ships that you were in a year, several years, big ships, small ships, sailing ships, cargo ships, oil tank, everything. And in your book, there's an undercurrent. And I'm going to ask you a question which you'll be familiar to. You'll be familiar with it because you wove it in and out of several chapters, not just one, when you change ships and things like that. It's different to be with the same people over and over and every day. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking with a fisherman myself. I'm not a fisherman, never went out to sea. And the fisherman I asked him sort of what was different, being out there versus here. He said, well, you got to get along. You've got to get along with people because you're out there with people, the same people over and over. And if I don't know that he used the slang, but push the buttons. You know the buttons to push if you wanted to, but you don't want to do that
That's right.
because this person is with you for several more days or weeks until you get back to
That's
shore.
true. That's true. And I can, with along those lines, I can go back, and I think I do write about the first captain.
Yes.
Yes. I won't go into great detail on that. You'll read it in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
But he bullied me.
There was something wrong with him. But
Yeah,
anyway,
he
yeah.
bullied me and riddled my self-confidence to this day, right up to retirement. I didn't like coming into a rival watches because he made it so hard on me. And that goes along with the lines with you got to get along with the people and you got to
Yeah.
be able to work with people.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, I think you even said correctly for people who are reading, you read the thing and it's about life at sea and that's ships, and so it's nothing to do with me. But when you're a reader and you draw them into it, you say, this is the same in inland too. You can run into this same thing. For instance, a family, you'll be together the same people over and over the day to day.
Right.
And you got to get along.
Right.
And I don't know that you use that lesson or that phrase, but the point is, and it's made over and it's made repeatedly in different ways, in many, marvelous a moral of the story kind of thing that's in there in your book to tell people we've got to get along.
Well, I want to digress a little bit. My daughters, when they were young, they grew up with me going away for long periods of time at sea. And my daughter came home one day and she said, Dad, my friends ask me when you're at sea if I have a dad. And then when you're home, they're asking if my dad has a job.
I like it both ways.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, and a lot of times people have said to me, well, you really, the kids got shortchanged when you were away for long periods of time. And I can make a comparison between the fishing fleet of Gloucester and what I did.
Yeah.
When I was gone for a long period of time. But when I was home on paid vacation for 2 months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I could get up in the morning and just say, okay, kids, where are we going to go today?
Right.
Whereas the people that go to sea on the fishing boats out of Gloucester, they might go out for several weeks. But when they come in, they're not on paid vacation. They're often in, but they're going down to the dock to mend nets or to work on the boat. So, their time is given up.
The next trip.
And the other thing I wanted to say is there's a trend. Most people I know that go to sea, they have done the same thing. You like throughout the thread of my my book, I've tried to quit going to sea several times, but I always go back.
Yeah.
And the lure is the time off in one stretch, and the money. The money's good.
Both ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing is that when you were this is useful for people that are now in school. I think there's often stresses in college or whatever else you're doing, and you're learning something, and it's tough. And in Maine Maritime Academy, you said in your book there were times that you really thought about quitting, getting out of here.
Yeah.
And what you said then, you said to yourself a mantra. You called it a mantra.
You know why you're here. You know why you're here, and there's only one way to get your license.
That's it.
And that's why I kept telling myself. I was in tears a few times, and I think most all of us were.
Yeah.
My classmates get together once a month on Zoom.
Even now, yeah.
We do. We get together.
Well, I got to say, you recognize that comes from within yourself, and it wasn't that somebody was standing beside you telling you this encouraging thing. You were saying it to yourself.
Right.
You remember why you're here. Why you're here.
Now, there were times where it's very different now. The hazing is not as predominant as it was then.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Captain George Grimes, I thank you for your time, for your preparation, for your giving us an opportunity to sort of travel the world with you and go from ship to ship and tell us the inside story of a world that we don't often get a chance to be with or inside. Water Under the Keel is the book. Water Under the Keel, Memoirs of a Seagoing Life by Captain George Grime. And I think that if you just pick it up and just flip through it, you'll find yourself wanting to bring it home because it's got the pictures and the chapters. Nothing's very long. Each chapter you've made it reader friendly. Each chapter is a few pages. It doesn't 30, 50 pages. It's 3 or 4 pages. Then the next chapter, chapter. So it's very good that way. Rockport, Gloucester, prominent, everything in it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Hey, anchors away.
I enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank you.
Check with you next time. Thank you, and good day.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo väki, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo väki, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähti